Chapter 231. Matthew Hesh stared at the recording device, his mind racing. The evidence was irrefutable. Bradford, Macias, Carter, and their allies had orchestrated a conspiracy so deep that it threatened the very foundation of Amarathia's government. Now, it was time to strike. Matthew turned to Collins, his chief of staff, who stood near the desk, waiting for orders. "Get the Attorney General on the phone, right now." Collins gave a sharp nod and stepped toward the telephone on the corner table. Within moments, the line connected. "Sir, it's urgent. The president needs you now." Matthew didn't wait for pleasantries. When Attorney General Daniel Whitaker's voice came through, Matthew spoke with measured intensity. "Whitaker, listen carefully. I have undeniable proof that multiple senators, high-ranking military officials, and business leaders have conspired to fabricate a war. I need arrest warrants drafted immediately." A pause. Then, Whitaker's voice came through, low and cautious. "Mr. President, are you absolutely certain?" Matthew clenched his jaw. "Beyond any doubt. I have names, documents, financial transactions, and a recorded confession. Bradford and his circle are orchestrating another false flag attack to force our hand into war. If we don't move now, we may be too late to stop it." There was a beat of silence before Whitaker responded. "I'll get the warrants drafted. But this won't be easy. Many of these men hold significant power in Congress. There will be resistance." Matthew's voice hardened. "I don't care. This ends tonight." Department of Justice Headquarters, 1:30 a.m. Attorney General Whitaker moved fast. Within hours, teams of legal experts worked tirelessly, assembling the necessary arrest warrants. The charges were staggering: conspiracy against the government, incitement to war, treason, and corruption. Agents from the U.S. Marshals and the Bureau of Investigation, Amarathia's leading law enforcement agencies, were briefed. Some agents hesitated, knowing the weight of the names they were about to take down. But the orders were clear. These men were traitors. Once everything was prepared, Whitaker called the White House. "We're ready. Read new adventures at Novelbin." Calm the Capitol, Washington, D.C. 3 a.m. The first arrests were swift and efficient. Senator James Macias was taken from his residence while he was asleep. The marshals entered his home with little resistance, pinning him down before he could even react. His wife screamed as he was dragged from his bed. But the agents didn't waver. "You have no idea what you're doing," Macias roared as he was forced into the back of a waiting car. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent read. Macias struggled, his face red with rage. "Hesh won't get away with this." But no one was listening. Senator Felix Carter was taken from his office. He had been reviewing documents late into the night when agents burst in. Unlike Macias, Carter didn't resist. He merely sat back in his chair, offering a dry smirk. "So, the president finally decided to play dirty." He muttered, "Felix Carter, you're under arrest for conspiracy against the Amarathian government." Carter sighed and held out his hands. "You don't know what you've started." Bradford's residence, 3:30 a.m. William Bradford was a light sleeper. Years in politics had taught him to be wary of every shift in power, every sudden change in circumstance. But even he wasn't prepared for the sudden pounding on his front door. "William Bradford, open the door." Bradford jolted awake, his wife stirred beside him, eyes groggy with confusion. "What's happening?" she whispered. Bradford's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his robe and moved to the window. His heart pounded at the sight of armed federal agents surrounding his estate. They had come for him. He turned to his wife, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me. Call Senator Hawthorne. Tell him I've been arrested. Tell him to mobilize everyone we have left in Congress." Before she could respond, the door burst open. "William Bradford, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the Amarathian government," an agent announced, stepping forward with restraints in hand. Bradford straightened his back, forcing himself to remain calm. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. "This is an abuse of power," he said coolly. "Hesh is overreaching, and when the public finds out, you'll all regret this." The agent ignored him. "Hands behind your back." Bradford clenched his jaw but complied. As they led him out of his house, past the line of waiting news reporters who had somehow caught wind of the arrests, he lifted his head high. This wasn't over. The White House, Washington, D.C. 4:15 a.m. Collins walked into the Oval Office, a file in hand. "It's done, sir. We have them all." Matthew exhaled. rubbing his temple. Any resistance? Collins shook his head. Some. Macias fought back. Carter was calm, but he made it clear this isn't over. And Bradford, well, he thinks he's still in control. Matthew sat back in his chair, his mind racing. We need to move fast by morning. The press will be all over this. We have to control the message before Bradford's allies spin it against us. Collins hesitated. There's something else, sir. Matthew looked up. What? Collins handed him a telegram. This came in an hour ago, from our military intelligence office in Veracruz. Matthew read the short message, his blood running cold. USS Monroe detected potential explosives on board, immediate evacuation underway. The attack was already in motion. Veracruz Naval Base. Amarathian waters. 5:30 a.m. The USS Monroe sat anchored in the harbor, its deck illuminated by spotlights as sailors scrambled across it. Naval investigators had discovered a suspicious cargo hold, and now the entire crew was being evacuated. Captain Trebor stood on the bridge, gripping the radio. This is Captain Reynolds of the USS Monroe. We've located several unregistered cargo crates in the lower decks. Possible explosives. Request immediate bomb disposal unit on site. A voice crackled through the radio. Understood. Captain, extraction team en route. Trebor exhaled. If they had been even a few hours late, the ship and every man on board would have been gone. The White House, Washington, D.C. 6 a.m. Collins rushed into the Oval Office, breathless. Sir, we just got confirmation. The Monroe was rigged with explosives. We caught it in time. Matthew let out a slow breath. They had stopped the final piece of Bradford's war machine. Now, there was only one thing left to do. He turned to Collins. Call a press conference today. Collins blinked. You're going public? Matthew's eyes burned with determination. Amarathia deserves the truth, and I'm going to give it to them. Later that day, the nation would awaken to the biggest scandal in Amarathian history. The headlines would scream of treason, and William Bradford, once the most powerful man in Washington, would sit in a prison cell watching as everything he built collapsed around him. Chapter 232. 10 a.m. The White House, Washington, D.C. The press room was packed. Journalists from every major newspaper, radio station, and political publication had gathered, their pens ready, their cameras poised. The entire nation was watching, waiting. President Matthew Hesh stood at the podium, his expression firm. His hands gripped the sides of the lectern, knuckles white. He wasn't here to spin a narrative. He wasn't here to appease Congress. He was here to tell the truth. A low murmur ran through the room before he spoke. Then, silence. The world held its breath. Matthew took a slow, steady breath and began. My fellow Amarathians, he said, his voice steady. Last night, the government of this nation faced a crisis that threatened our democracy, our security, and the very lives of our citizens. It was not an external enemy that brought us to this brink, but men within our own government. A wave of shocked murmurs spread through the crowd. The journalists exchanged glances, some scribbling furiously. Over the past several weeks, certain members of Congress, high-ranking military officials, and private interests have conspired to push Amarathia into an unjust war. They have manipulated public perception, manufactured evidence, and staged attacks to justify an invasion of Mexico. The murmurs grew louder, but Matthew pressed on. I have gathered undeniable proof documents, financial records, and even recorded confessions that reveal how these individuals planned false flag attacks to deceive the public into supporting this war. They were willing to sacrifice the lives of Amarathian soldiers for their own political and financial gain. A loud gasp filled the room. The flash of cameras exploded as journalists rushed to document his words. Senators William Bradford, James Macias, Felix Carter, along with several high-ranking military officials, have been arrested and charged with conspiracy, treason, and incitement to war. Their plan included bombing our own naval vessel, the USS Monroe, and staging deadly border skirmishes to create the illusion of an attack from Mexico. Some in the crowd looked stunned. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Matthew let the silence settle before continuing. These men betrayed Amarathia. They betrayed the very people they swore to serve, and had they succeeded, thousands of lives would have been lost in a war built on lies. His gaze swept across the room, his tone growing sharper. Let me be clear, this government will not be held hostage by warmongers. I will not allow this nation to march into an era of conquest under the guise of security. We will not send our sons to die for the ambitions of corrupt men. His voice steadied. The arrests last night were just the beginning. There will be full investigations. Every name, every document, every transaction will be scrutinized. Those who betrayed Amarathia will face justice. Matthew took a step back from the podium, his eyes burning with conviction. This is a turning point for our nation. We must decide whether we will remain a country governed by truth or by manipulation and fear. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I choose truth, and I hope every Amarathian will stand with me. With that, he stepped away from the podium. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. The flashes of cameras nearly blinded him, but Matthew didn't stay. He had said what needed to be said. He walked off the stage, his face unreadable. He had just declared war not on another country, but on the corruption that had infested Amarathia's government. The fight was far from over. Discover more content at novelbin.com. The White House, Washington, D.C. 12 p.m. Matthew sat in the Oval Office. Staring at the window, his body felt heavy, his hands ached from gripping the podium too tightly. The speech was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Congress was in chaos. Some senators were already calling for his impeachment. Military resignations were piling up. The political world was on fire. A soft knock on the door. Come in, he said, his voice lower than he intended. Amber stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't an advisor. She wasn't here to talk strategy. She was his wife. She walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. It's done, she said softly. You told them the truth. Matthew exhaled slowly, and now I wait to see what the fallout will be. Amber sat beside him on the couch, her fingers brushing over his. You saved thousands of lives today, Matt. He let out a dry chuckle, and I may have just ended my presidency in the process. Amber squeezed his hand. If telling the truth ends your presidency, then it wasn't a presidency worth keeping. He turned to look at her, seeing the quiet strength in her eyes. She continued, you didn't do this for politics. You did this because it was right. That's what makes you different from them, and no matter what happens next, you did the right thing. Matthew rubbed his face. He hesitated. I never thought it would come to this. Amber nodded. I know. She reached up and brushed his hair back, her fingers lingering against his cheek. But you're not alone. Matthew looked at her for a long moment before sighing. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against her shoulder. Thank you, he murmured. Amber held him close, always. Amber's fingers traced soothing circles against his back as they sat in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on Matthew's shoulders. But for now, in this quiet moment, he wasn't the president. He wasn't the man fighting against Congress or the military or the press. He was just Matt, and she was just Amber. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his. Come with me? She whispered. Matthew hesitated. Amber, no more thinking. She cut him off softly. Not tonight. She took his hand and led him away from the couch, away from the war raging outside those walls. Tonight, there would be no politics, no speeches, no battles, only them in their bedroom, and soon the staffs working in the White House would hear someone moaning. Chapter 233. December 20th, 1896, undisclosed location. Amarathia. A cold wind howled outside the secluded estate, nestled deep within the Virginia countryside. The building was an unassuming mansion on the surface, its architecture blending with the aristocratic homes of the wealthy elite. But beneath its foundations, hidden from the public eye, lay a sprawling underground chamber where the true masters of Amarathia convened. The room was dimly lit by a grand chandelier, its golden glow casting long shadows. Across the polished marble floor, at the center of the room, sat an oval table made of dark mahogany, large enough to seat a dozen figures. The air was thick with cigar smoke, and the faint scent of old parchment and ink filled the space. Seated at the table were men of power, billionaires, military leaders, industrialists, and shadowy figures who never appeared in any official government document. They were the true architects of Amarathia's expansionist ambitions. They had orchestrated wars, assassinations, economic collapses, and political uprisings, all without their names ever being spoken in public. They were the Order of the Phoenix Society, the true rulers of Amarathia, and tonight, they were furious. At the head of the table sat an older man, his face half hidden in the shadows. His name was Gideon Langston, the Order's Grand Chancellor. His steely blue eyes flickered with cold rage as he reviewed the latest reports. Next to him sat Cornelius Voss, a shipping magnate whose wealth had funded much of Amarathia's naval expansion. Across from them, Jonathan Hawthorne, an influential senator who had helped draft war policies behind closed doors, sat with his fingers steepled together. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Langston spoke. His voice was slow, measured, and filled with quiet malice. Bradford was a fool. No one disagreed. Langston exhaled through his nose, placing the papers down on the table. Years of planning, millions of florins in military investments, entire political careers sacrificed, all of it undone by one arrogant, reckless mistake. Voss scoffed. He thought too highly of himself, believed that controlling Congress would be enough to force Hesch's hand. We underestimated the president. He leaned back, swirling the whiskey in his glass. The man should have been removed long before this. The damage is catastrophic, Hawthorne added bitterly. The public isn't just turning on Bradford and Macias, they're beginning to question everything. His voice darkened. For the first time in decades, the Amarathian people are looking past the illusion we've built. If they start pulling at the threads, Langston shot him a glare. We will not allow that to happen. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. A hidden hand, a figure sitting in the farthest seat, finally spoke, his voice low and composed. He was known only as Victor Kessler, a man whose very existence was considered a rumor even among the most powerful elites. We must reassess, Kessler said, setting his cigar down. Bradford's failure has cost us dearly, but it is not the end. This nation's future still belongs to us. We simply need to correct course. Langston nodded. We still control the financial markets, the railways, the industrial supply chains. The war effort is wounded, but not dead. If we adapt quickly, we can recover. Hawthorne frowned. And what of Hesch? He's more dangerous than we anticipated. Kessler smirked. Then we adjust our approach. Silence followed, and all eyes turned toward him. We must destabilize his presidency. Make the people lose faith in him, in his leadership. Kessler leaned forward, his expression calculating. We still hold many assets in Congress, in the military, in the media. If we play this correctly, we can turn his great victory into his greatest downfall. Voss chuckled darkly. A scandal, then? Kessler nodded. Not just any scandal, one that will erode his credibility. One that will ensure no one trusts his leadership again. Langston exhaled, rubbing his chin. Do we have anything we can use? Kessler tapped his fingers against the table. We have resources. A careful leak of sensitive war documents could make it seem as though Hesch has been collaborating with Mexico all along. With the right narrative, we turn him from a hero into a traitor. Hawthorne's lips curled into a knowing smile. And the people will demand his removal. Langston nodded slowly. Yes, this could work. Voss clinked his glass against the table. Hesch may have won this battle, but he will not win the war. Langston turned to the rest of the room, his gaze sweeping across the gathered elites. We move forward with Kessler's plan. Leaked war documents, false narratives, disinformation campaigns. We make Hesch fight for his survival until he has no allies left. A chorus of approval spread through the room. Victor Kessler stood, smoothing out his suit. He'll arrange for the leaks to be sent through independent journalists, unaffiliated, radical sources, ones that Hesch's administration won't be able to control. Langston exhaled. Good, we must also ensure the military remains loyal to us. We have enough generals in our pocket, but with Bradford gone, they may hesitate. We must remind them where their true allegiance lies. Hawthorne spoke again. And if Hesch resists? If he continues to fight us? Kessler gave him a knowing look. Then we ensure he is removed permanently. The room fell silent. They all knew what that meant. Explore stories at Novelbin. A president could be discredited. A president could be impeached. But a president could also be eliminated. Langston tapped his fingers against the table, deep in thought. We wait for now, we weaken him, we turn the people against him, and if that fails, he let the sentence hang. Everyone in the room understood. They would not let Matthew Hesch undo what they had spent generations building. The meeting ended. Soon after, one by one, the most powerful men in Amarathia rose from the table and disappeared into the shadows. And as Langston stood to leave, he turned to Kessler. See to it personally. Kessler smirked. Of course. As the doors closed behind them, The gears of conspiracy were already turning. Bradford had failed. But the Order of the Phoenix Society would not, and Matthew Hesh's war was far from over. Chapter 234. December 24, 1896. The White House had been transformed into a place of warmth and celebration. A stark contrast to the political battlefield it had been just days ago. Wreaths of pine and holly adorned the grand staircases, while the smell of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider filled the air. The grand Christmas tree in the East Room stood tall, decorated with golden ribbons, delicate glass ornaments, and candle-shaped lights that flickered like stars. Despite the grandeur, President Matthew Hesh found himself unable to fully embrace the holiday spirit. The last few weeks had been relentless, exposing Bradford's conspiracy, dismantling a war that would have claimed thousands of lives, and now dealing with the fallout of political chaos that had consumed Washington. But tonight, he promised himself, and more importantly, Amber, that he would let it all go, at least for one night. A soft knock at the door of his study pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, knowing exactly who it was. Amber stepped inside, carrying a small tray with 2 cups of tea. She had dressed for the evening in an emerald gown, the color complementing her auburn hair, which was loosely pinned up. She smiled as she approached, setting the tray on the table in front of him. "You're thinking too much again?" she teased. Settling into the chair across from him, Matthew chuckled, rubbing his temples. "It's a habit at this point." Amber took a sip of her tea, watching him. "For tonight, just for tonight, can you forget about the Senate, about impeachment threats, about Congress?" Matthew met her gaze, seeing the quiet plea behind her words. She had been by his side through all of the long nights, the endless meetings, the uncertainty of whether he would survive the political war waged against him. And despite it all, she had remained his rock. "You're right," he admitted, exhaling deeply. "Tonight is for us." A knock at the door interrupted them, followed by Collins, his ever-loyal chief of staff, stepping inside. "Sir, the Christmas banquet is ready. The staff has finished the final preparations, and guests have started arriving." Matthew straightened, glancing at Amber, who gave him a satisfied nod. "Everything in order?" "Yes, sir," Collins confirmed. "The guest list includes several members of Congress, military officers, and their families. The first lattice arrangement for the children's Christmas gifts has also been handled." Amber smiled. "Wonderful. And the letters to the soldiers stationed abroad?" "Sent out this morning," Collins assured her. Matthew stood, reaching for Amber's hand. "Then let's enjoy the night." The White House ballroom glowed under the soft light of chandeliers. A grand banquet table stretched from one end of the room to the other, covered in roasted meats, fresh bread, cranberry sauces, and golden candlesticks. A string quartet played a soft melody in the corner as guests moved through the room. Enjoying the warm ambience, Matthew moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging greetings, despite the lingering political tension. Tonight was a celebration, and he was determined to keep it that way. Military officers approached him, thanking him for preventing a war that would have sent countless soldiers to their deaths. Families of those who would have been deployed looked at him with gratitude. But not everyone in the room was pleased. Matthew noticed certain figures, senators and political allies of Bradford, standing in the corners, watching him closely. He could see the restrained hostility in their eyes. These were men who had been spared from the wave of arrests, but had still played a role in the conspiracy. The Order of the Phoenix Society's influence still lingered. Amber, sensing his unease, squeezed his hand. "Matt, let it go, just for tonight." He exhaled, nodding. "You're right. Let's enjoy the evening." As the night went on, Matthew made sure to speak with as many guests as possible. Laughter filled the ballroom as children played near the tree, their eyes lighting up as they received gifts arranged by Amber. It was a moment of peace, a rare reprieve from the battles he had fought since taking office. As the banquet came to an end and the guests began to depart, Matthew felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't fighting a war, political or otherwise. By the time the last guest had left, it was nearing midnight. Matthew and Amber retreated to their private quarters, where a smaller, more intimate Christmas tree stood in the corner. Unlike the grandeur of the East Room's tree, this one was decorated with simple white candles and a golden star at the top. Amber poured them each a glass of wine before settling onto the couch beside him. She let out a content sigh as she leaned against him. "That was nice." she murmured. Matthew took a sip of his drink, nodding. It was a much-needed distraction. Amber glanced up at him. You did well tonight. No political debates, no dramatic speeches, just Christmas. Matthew chuckled. That was harder than any speech I've ever given. She smirked. I could tell. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire crackle in the hearth, the warmth of the room, the faint scent of pine, and the quiet company of each other made it easy to forget, just for a moment, the challenges waiting for them outside these walls. Amber set down her glass and stood, walking over to the window. The snowfall outside made the city look peaceful, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded in recent months. Do you think things will ever be peaceful again? She asked. Matthew joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. I don't know, but as long as I have nights like this, I can hope. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Merry Christmas, Matt. He kissed the top of her head. Merry Christmas, Amber. She turned in his arms, her fingers tracing over the buttons of his shirt. Do you remember our first Christmas together? Matthew smirked. How could I forget? We were in that tiny apartment, we burned the roast, and the tree nearly fell over twice. Amber laughed softly, and we stayed up all night just talking, listening to the radio. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly over her skin. I remember every second of it. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then let's make tonight just as memorable. Matthew didn't resist as she led him toward their bedroom. The warmth of the fire faded behind them, replaced by something deeper, more intimate. Enjoy new tales from Freeweb novel. Outside, the world still waited for them. The battles, the conspiracies, the enemies lurking in the shadows, but tonight was theirs. Chapter 235. December 31st, 1896, the White House, Washington, D.C. The morning of December 31st was crisp and cold, the kind of winter air that carried both the weight of the old year and the promise of the new. Snow blanketed the White House lawn, and icicles clung to the edges of the grand columns at the entrance. Inside, the residence was already a hive of activity. The staff moved quickly, preparing for the busy schedule ahead. President Matthew Hesh sat at the long dining table in the private quarters, sipping coffee while reviewing the day's itinerary. Across from him, Amber read through her own schedule, occasionally glancing up at him. For public visits, Amber murmured, tapping the paper in front of her, the National Orphanage, the Veterans Hospital, the Union Workers' Hall, and finally the Capitol for the New Year's address. Matthew sighed. It's a full day. Amber smirked. You're the president. Every day is a full day. He exhaled, setting his coffee down. After everything that's happened, this might be the first new year where I'm not bracing for war. Amber reached over, squeezing his hand, which is exactly why today is important. People need to see you out there, not just as their president, but as someone who cares. Matthew nodded. She was right. The country was still reeling from the political turmoil of the last few months. Bradford's conspiracy, the arrests, the near war. Some people still didn't trust him, while others saw him as the man who saved Amarathia from unnecessary bloodshed. This was his chance to remind them of what truly mattered. 11 a.m. Washington, D.C. The carriage ride to the National Orphanage was slow, the streets lined with people braving the cold to catch a glimpse of the president and First Lady. Some waved, some called out in support, and others simply watched in silence. Matthew and Amber arrived at the large brick building, where children, bundled in warm coats and scarves, lined up outside with their caretakers. The moment the couple stepped out of the carriage, the children's eyes widened with excitement. Amber smiled warmly, crouching down to speak to a little girl who clung to a tattered doll. What's your name? The girl hesitated, glancing at her caretaker, before whispering, Lily. Well, Lily, Amber said gently, we brought some special gifts for you and your friends today. Matthew signaled to the aides, who began unloading wrapped presents from the care books, wooden toys, and warm blankets for the children. Mr. President, a young boy called out, is it true you stopped a war? Matthew knelt down to his level, offering a small smile. I stopped bad men from making one, but wars don't just happen on battlefields, son. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight every day. To stay strong, to be kind, and to look out for each other. The boy nodded solemnly, as if he understood. Amber squeezed Matthew's hand as they continued through the orphanage, meeting the caretakers and listening to their concerns. Many spoke about lack of funding, overcrowding, and the struggle to provide for the children. We'll work on this, Matthew assured them. The government should do more for places like this. Amber glanced at him, impressed. He wasn't just offering empty words, she meant it. 2 p.m. Amarathian Army Medical Center. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and the faint scent of burning coal from the heating system. Rows of beds lined the walls, some occupied by wounded veterans from past conflicts, others by men recovering from recent injuries sustained in training accidents or border skirmishes. Matthew and Amber walked through the halls, stopping at each bed, listening to the soldiers. Stories, some had lost limbs, others had scars that ran deeper than flesh. One soldier, a man missing his right arm, saluted weakly with his left. "Mr. President." Matthew returned the salute. "You served Amarathia with honor. How are they treating you here?" The soldier forced a smile. "Better than the battlefield, sir." "Stay connected through Freeweb novel." Amber stepped forward. "And your family? Are they receiving support?" The soldier hesitated. "They manage. My wife takes in sewing work. The pension helps, but we can do better." Matthew interrupted, looking at the hospital director. "Ensure this man's family receives additional aid." The director nodded. Amber squeezed the soldier's hand. "You are not forgotten." The man's eyes misted. "Thank you, ma'am." As they left the hospital, Matthew felt the weight of responsibility settle on him once more. 5:30 p.m. Washington Labor Union headquarters. The hall was filled with men and women, workers from the railroads, the factories, and the docks. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, but their eyes were filled with determination. A union leader stood before the crowd. "Mr. President, many of us supported you because we believed you were different, but the corporation, the same ones that backed Bradford, are still crushing us. Wages are low, conditions are dangerous. When will that change?" Matthew took a deep breath. "I won't promise miracles, but I will promise this. I will stand with the workers of Amarathia. Our nation was built on the backs of men and women like you, and it's time you were treated with the respect you deserve." The crowd murmured, some nodded, others remained skeptical. A woman in the front row spoke up. "Words are cheap, Mr. President." Matthew met her gaze. "Then judge me by my actions." Amber watched him, knowing this was the Matthew Hesh she had always believed, a man who didn't just speak, but acted. 10:00 p.m. Thousands had gathered at the Capitol for the New Year's Eve celebration. Fireworks were prepared, music played. And despite the political tensions of the year, the people of Amarathia came together to welcome a new beginning. Matthew and Amber stood on the balcony of the Capitol, looking down at the sea of people. Collins approached. "It's almost time for your speech." "Sir." Matthew glanced at Amber, who smiled. "Go," she whispered. He stepped forward, the crowd growing quiet. "My fellow Amarathians," he began, his voice strong. "This has been a year of trials, of hardships, of battles fought in the shadows, but as we stand here, on the eve of a new year, we look not at the struggles behind us, but the future ahead." A cheer rose from the crowd. "I will not pretend the road forward will be easy. I will not promise that all wrongs will be righted overnight, but I swear to you on my oath, on my name, on my soul, that I will not falter. I will not abandon this fight for a better Amarathia." The people erupted in applause. Matthew turned to Amber, offering his hand. She took it, squeezing tightly. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. He exhaled, the weight of the past year pressing on him. 7, 6, 5. Amber leaned in. "No matter what happens next," she whispered, "we face it together." For 3, 2, 1. Fireworks lit up the sky, cheers filled the air, and as the first second of the new year began, Matthew kissed his wife. 1897 had begun, and the fight for Amarathia's future was far from over. Chapter 236. January 1st, 1897. The White House, Washington, D.C. The first morning of the new year arrived with a quiet stillness. The celebrations of the night before had long faded, replaced by the soft hush of snowfall blanketing the city. The White House, usually a place of political scheming and restless activity, felt strangely peaceful. President Matthew Hesh sat in the private dining room, still dressed in his white undershirt and suspenders, a hot cup of coffee in his hands. The scent of roasted beans mixed with the lingering pine of the Christmas decorations that still adorned the residence. It was the rare kind of morning where time seemed to slow, if only for a moment. Across from him, Amber sat with her own cup of tea. Her hair slightly tousled from sleep, she was still in her robe, a stark contrast to the polished first lady the world saw in public, but here, in the privacy of their home, she was simply Amber. Matthew watched her, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Happy New Year," he murmured. Amber met his gaze, her lips curving into a warm smile. "Happy New Year, Matt." The warmth of the exchange settled between them, a quiet reprieve from the political storms that had defined the past months, but even in the stillness of the moment, Matthew could sense that something was on Amber's mind. She was fidgeting, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her teacup. He set his coffee down, leaning forward slightly. "Amber." She blinked up at him, her expression unreadable for a brief second before softening. "There's something I need to tell you." His heart immediately skipped a beat. He had seen that look before, the hesitation, the careful way she measured her words. Was she unwell? Had something happened? Matthew reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "What is it?" Amber took a deep breath, her fingers tightening slightly around his. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. I'm pregnant. For a moment, the world stood still. Matthew stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up with what she had just said. The words echoed in his head, almost too impossible to believe. Then, warmth spread through his chest, a mixture of joy, shock, and something deeper. He swallowed, searching her face. You're serious? Amber let out a small laugh, tears glistening in her eyes. Yes, Matt, we're having another child. Matthew let out a breathless chuckle. He pushed his chair back, standing quickly as he made his way to her side. Gently, carefully, he pulled her to her feet. You're serious? He repeated, as if saying it again would make it more real. Amber laughed again, her hand resting over his. I wouldn't joke about this. Matthew exhaled deeply, then he broke into a wide smile. Amber, his voice caught in his throat. He didn't have words, just pure, overwhelming emotion. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, protectively, his heart hammered against his ribs. Not with fear, not with anxiety, but with something beautiful, a second child, a new beginning. After everything they had been through, the conspiracies, the arrests, the war that almost happened, this was real, this was theirs. He pulled back slightly, pressing a firm kiss to her forehead before looking down at her stomach. Slowly, he placed his hand over it, his thumb gently brushing against the fabric of her robe. How long have you known? He asked, his voice quieter now. Amber bit her lip, glancing away for a second. A little over a week. I wanted to wait until after the new year before telling you. Matthew laughed softly, shaking his head. I can't believe it. Amber smirked. Believe it. He cupped her face, his eyes filled with unfiltered love. Are you feeling okay? Any sickness? Pain? Amber chuckled. Just a little morning nausea, but nothing I can't handle. Matthew pressed another kiss to her forehead, his hands never leaving her. We're having another baby, he murmured, almost in awe. Amber leaned into him. Yes, we are. They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, letting the moment settle in. The soft laughter of their 3-year-old son, Arthur, echoed through the halls as he ran through the sitting room. The child had boundless energy, his small feet pattering against the floor as he chased after his wooden toy horse. Amber and Matthew sat together on the couch, watching their son with amused smiles. Arthur, Amber called gently. The boy paused mid-run, turning to face them, his green eyes wide with curiosity. Yes, Mama. Amber patted the seat next to her. Come here, sweetheart. Arthur trotted over, climbing onto the couch with clumsy excitement. He was still small, still innocent to the weight of the world his father carried. Enjoy exclusive content from Freeweb novel. Matthew took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with Amber. Arthur, how would you feel about being a big brother? Arthur blinked, his little hands clenched into fists of excitement. A big brother? Amber smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Yes, sweetheart, Mama is going to have a baby. Arthur gasped, his tiny hands flying to his cheeks. A baby? Like a little me. Matthew chuckled, something like that. Arthur jumped up excitedly, bouncing on the couch. I want to teach them how to build towers. And how to run really fast. Amber laughed, pulling him into her lap. You're going to be the best big brother. Arthur beamed, his joy infectious. Where's the baby? Can I see them? Amber smiled softly, taking his small hand and placing it on her stomach. The baby is in Mama's tummy right now, growing. Arthur furrowed his brows, his tiny fingers pressing lightly. Is it sleeping? Matthew smirked. Probably. Arthur leaned in, whispering, Hello, baby, I'm Arthur. Amber felt her heart swell. She looked up at Matthew, who had the same warmth in his eyes. This was what mattered, no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter the political storms, the conspiracies, the enemies lurking in the shadow. This was their moment. Their family. Matthew reached out, placing his hand over Amber's, over Arthur's tiny fingers. A new year, a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, he truly let himself believe that everything would be okay. Chapter 237. January 2nd, 1897, the White House, Washington, D.C. The morning after the announcement of Amber's pregnancy, Matthew awoke to the soft glow of winter sunlight filtering through the heavy drapes of the presidential bedroom. The warmth of the previous night still lingered in his chest, but reality quickly reminded him that life as president of Amarathia did not allow for much time to dwell in personal joy. Lying beside him, Amber was still fast asleep, curled on her side with one hand resting gently on her stomach. The sight made him smile. Carefully, so as not to wake her, Matthew slipped out of bed, threw on his robe, and stepped out into the adjacent sitting room where the crackling fireplace offered a reprieve from the January chill. The peace didn't last long. Collins was already waiting. Sir, his chief of staff greeted, holding a stack of morning briefings. We need to talk. Matthew sighed, rubbing his temple. Let me guess, congressional backlash? Collins nodded grimly. They aren't letting up. Bradford's allies are still pushing for hearings on your abuse of power regarding the arrests. Hawthorne is stirring up trouble in the Senate, and now some of the newspapers are running with the idea that you staged the entire thing for political gain. Matthew exhaled sharply. He should have expected this. Just because Bradford and his inner circle had been taken down didn't mean the war against corruption was over. The Order of the Phoenix Society still had its claws in Amarathia's institutions. Anything more pressing? Matthew asked, taking one of the reports from Collins and scanning the headlines. Nothing immediate, Collins admitted, but the opposition is working hard to turn the tide against you. They're capitalizing on every moment of instability. We should expect more challenges in the coming weeks. Matthew nodded slowly, placing the report down. Then we deal with it, just like we always do. Collins gave a curt nod. Of course, sir. Just then, the door to the bedroom creaked open and Amber stepped out, still wrapped in her robe. She blinked at Collins before looking at Matthew, a small smile playing on her lips. You're working already? She teased, walking over to pour herself a cup of tea. Collins gave a respectful nod. Good morning, First Lady. Amber sighed, shaking her head. I should have known Matt wouldn't take a day to enjoy some peace. Matthew chuckled, walking over to her and pressing a soft kiss to her temple. I wouldn't be much of a president if I did. She rolled her eyes playfully but squeezed his hand. At least eat breakfast before you throw yourself back into work. Matthew turned back to Collins. Give me an hour. Then we'll start tackling the mess. Collins nodded and stepped out, leaving the couple alone. Amber leaned against the counter, sipping her tea. So, what's the damage? Matthew sighed. More of the same. Congress is still fighting me. The press is trying to spin a new scandal, and Hawthorne won't back down. Amber frowned. You knew this wouldn't end with Bradford's arrest. I did, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I didn't expect them to regroup so quickly. Amber placed a gentle hand on his chest. Then we stay ahead of them. Matthew studied her for a moment, then nodded. You always know what to say. She smirked. That's why you married me. They shared a quiet moment before Amber's expression turned serious. Matt, we need to talk about something else. Matthew raised an eyebrow. What is it? Amber hesitated. I know you want to keep moving forward, but with the baby coming, we need to start thinking about what that means for us, for our family. Matthew nodded, his expression growing thoughtful. You mean safety? Amber nodded. After everything that's happened, the conspiracies, the threats, I need to know that our family is protected. We can't pretend that just because Bradford is gone, the danger is too. Matthew exhaled, his jaw tightening. You're right. Amber reached out, taking his hand in hers. I know you're fighting battles on every front, but this is different. Our children. She paused. I need to know that no matter what happens in Washington, they'll be safe. Matthew squeezed her hand. I'll make sure of it. Amber studied him. That means real precautions, Matt. Not just extra guards. I want a plan in place. Matthew nodded. I'll talk to the security team. We'll reinforce the household detail, and I'll arrange for extra precautions when you and Arthur go anywhere. Amber let out a breath of relief. Thank you. Matthew pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I won't let anything happen to you or our children. I promise. Explore more at Novelbin. Calm by midday, Matthew had cleared his schedule, opting to spend the afternoon with Amber and Arthur. The three of them sat in the private sitting room, where a warm fire crackled in the hearth. Arthur, ever the ball of energy, was seated on the floor with his wooden toy soldiers, arranging them into battle formations. Papa! Look! The cavalry is attacking the fortress. Matthew chuckled, crouching down beside him. Ah! But what's your strategy? You can't just charge in. Arthur furrowed his brows. I make them run really fast. Amber laughed softly. That sounds like a very determined army. Matthew tousled Arthur's hair. That's one way to do it. Arthur turned to Amber. Mama, do you think the baby will like toy soldiers? Amber smiled, running a hand over her stomach. Maybe, or maybe they'll like something else. We'll have to wait and see. Arthur nodded, deep in thought. I'll teach them everything I know. Matthew felt a wave of warmth fill his chest. Moments like this, they were what he was fighting for. Not just policies, not just power struggles, but for the future of his family. Amber leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. It's going to be a long year, isn't it? Matthew sighed. Yes, but we'll get through it. Amber smiled softly. Together. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Together. Outside, the world still moved forward, the battles in Congress, the enemies in the shadows, the uncertainty of what was to come. But for now, in this quiet moment, none of it mattered, because in this room they were just a family, and no matter what lay ahead, that was something worth fighting for. Chapter 238. January 3rd, 1897. The White House, Washington, D.C. President Matthew Hesh sat behind his desk in the Oval Office, the morning light streaming through the large windows. The weight of the nation rested on his shoulders, but today, his thoughts were centered on a singular question: his future. Across from him, Collins stood with a thick folder in his hands, filled with polling data, newspaper clippings, and notes from key political operatives. The tension in the room was thick. "You know why I'm here, sir," Collins said, taking a seat. Matthew sighed. Rubbing his temple, "Go ahead and ask." Collins didn't hesitate. "Are you running for re-election?" "Explore more at Novelbin." Matthew didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the desk. He had expected this question, but now that it was finally asked, it carried more weight than he had anticipated. Collins waited patiently before Matthew finally spoke. "Yes," Matthew said, his voice firm, "I'm running." Collins exhaled slowly, nodding. "Then the fight is just beginning." Matthew leaned forward, hands clasped. It never ended. Collins set the folder on the desk and flipped it open. "Your approval rating is complicated. The people who love you really love you. They see you as the man who saved Amarathia from a pointless war, but your enemies? They're more dangerous than ever." Collins frowned. "Your enemy will do everything they can to ensure you don't win another term. They control newspapers, Congress, and even some parts of the military. They're already framing you as a dictator, claiming you overstepped your power to prevent war." Matthew exhaled sharply. "So, what else is new?" Collins gave a small smirk but quickly turned serious again. "The point is, they won't just try to remove you politically. If they think they can't beat you at the ballot box, they'll look for other ways." Matthew understood exactly what he was implying. "Assassination. They won't touch me while I'm still in office," Matthew said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. "But after?" Collins shook his head. "We can't assume anything. You've made powerful enemies, Matt, the kind that don't hesitate." Matthew stood and walked over to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds of the White House. He had been thinking about this for days. Ever since the threat of war had been dismantled, he knew that his enemies weren't gone, they had simply gone underground. And if they were working in the shadows, so would he. "There's something I've been considering," Matthew finally said, turning back to Collins. "A way to ensure my protection. Not just mine, Amber's, Arthur's, the baby's." Collins' brows furrowed. "You're talking about increasing the Secret Service detail?" "No." Matthew walked back to his desk. "The Secret Service is still a government agency. As much as I trust them, their loyalty is to the office of the president, not to me personally. If something happens, if something infiltrates deeper than we think, I can't rely on them alone." Collins narrowed his eyes. "Then what exactly are you suggesting?" Matthew took a deep breath. "Informing a private military." Collins blinked. "What?" Matthew leaned forward. "A discreet force, one that answers only to me, not officially recognized, not publicly known. They'll operate in the shadows, just like the people trying to take me down." Collins was silent for a long moment before exhaling sharply. "This is dangerous territory, Matt." "I know," Matthew admitted, "but I don't see another option. We can't fight these men using conventional means. They have the media, Congress, even some of the military under their thumb if they want me dead. I need to make sure that I have people watching my back that I can trust." Collins crossed his arms. "This isn't just about security, is it?" Matthew shook his head. "No, someone isn't just trying to remove me. They're trying to reshape Amarathia into something it was never meant to be. If I fall, there's no telling what they'll do next. I need an organization that can work beyond the limits of bureaucracy to expose them, to dismantle their influence, and if necessary to eliminate threats before they escalate." Collins let out a low whistle. "You're talking about creating an underground intelligence unit, a group of operatives working beyond the law." Matthew nodded. "Call it what you want, but I need them." Collins sighed, rubbing his temple. "Do you even know how to build something like this?" "I have ideas," Matthew admitted. "But I need someone who can help me make it happen." Collins raised an eyebrow. "Who do you have in mind?" Matthew opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a single file. He slid it across the desk to Collins. Collins picked it up and read the name, Elias Vaughn. Collins nodded slowly. "Vaughn's got the experience, military intelligence, covert operations, and he's already proven he's on your side." Matthew met Colin's gaze. He's the only one I trust to build this. If he says no, I won't move forward. Colin sighed. Then I guess you should talk to him. Matthew nodded. I already sent for him this morning. Collins looked surprised. You were this sure? Matthew smirked. You just said it yourself. I've made a lot of enemies. That means I need to be ahead of them. A knock at the door interrupted them. Collins turned. That's probably... The door opened, and Elias Vaughn stepped in. Matthew motioned for Vaughn to take a seat. The man sat down, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. You called for me, Mr. President? Vaughn asked. Matthew nodded. I have a job for you. Something off the books. Vaughn raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Matthew leaned forward. I need a force that operates outside official channels. No government ties. No public knowledge. A security force that answers only to me. Vaughn's expression didn't change. You're talking about a private military. Matthew nodded. Vaughn exhaled, setting his hands on the desk. If I do this, I need full control over recruitment, training, and operations. I need funding, and most importantly, I need your complete trust. You'll have it, Matthew said without hesitation. Vaughn studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right, then let's get to work. As Vaughn left to begin preparations, Collins turned to Matthew. This is going to change everything. Collins said quietly. Matthew nodded. I know, because he had just taken the first step toward a war that would never be seen by the public. And this time, he wasn't just fighting for Amarathia, he was fighting for his family. Chapter 239. January 5, 1897, the White House, Washington, D.C. The weight of the decision settled fully on President Matthew Hesch's shoulders as he stood in front of the mirror in his private quarters, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. The day had arrived, the moment when he would officially declare his bid for re-election. He had thought long and hard about this decision over the past weeks, debating whether the cost of another term was worth it, his family's safety, the threats lurking in the shadows, and the sheer force of his opposition were all reasons to walk away. But walking away meant surrendering Amarathia to the very forces that had nearly pushed it into a manufactured war. It meant letting the Order of the Phoenix Society regain control from behind the curtain, undoing everything he had fought for. He couldn't allow that to happen. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in. He called. Amber stepped inside, dressed elegantly yet simply. She had been his strongest supporter through everything, and today was no different. Are you ready? She asked. Matthew exhaled, rolling his shoulders. As ready as he'll ever be. Amber walked over and fixed his tie, her touch lingering for a moment. You're doing the right thing, Matt. He met her gaze. It won't be easy. She smirked. It never is with you. A small chuckle escaped him. That's fair. There was another knock at the door, this time Collins. Sir, it's time. Matthew gave Amber one last look before nodding. Let's go. The press conference, the East Room of the White House, was packed. Reporters filled every available space. Pens poised, cameras ready. The entire nation was watching. Matthew stepped up to the podium, his expression calm but resolute. He glanced at Amber, Collins, and his key advisors standing nearby, offering silent reassurance. He cleared his throat. My fellow Amarathians, he began. 6 months ago, our nation stood at the brink of war. The decisions made in those days were some of the hardest I've ever faced. I was confronted not by a foreign enemy, but by corruption within our own government. The room fell silent. Every journalist leaned in. I stood before you then and told you the truth that certain individuals within our political and military institutions sought to manufacture a war, deceive the public, and send thousands of our sons to die for their own ambitions. They were arrested, but the fight did not end there. The fight against corruption, against those who believe power is theirs to wield without accountability, continues. He let that settle before moving forward, and because of that fight, because of the work that remains unfinished, I am officially announcing my candidacy for re-election as president of Amarathia. The room exploded, camera flashes erupted, reporters shouted questions, and the energy in the space shifted instantly. Matthew raised a hand, calming the room. I am running for re-election not for power, not for recognition, but because I believe in the promise of Amarathia nation that stands for truth, for progress, for its people. Over the last years, we have made strides in strengthening our industries, improving workers' rights, and defending this country from those who would seek to manipulate it from within. He gripped the podium, his voice growing stronger, but our work is far from over. There are those who wish to see us fail, those who will stop at nothing to reverse the progress we have made. I cannot, and I will not, allow that to happen. A murmur ran through the room. I have heard the criticisms, the accusations, the attempts to discredit this administration. I am fully aware that the fight ahead will not be easy, but I do not fear the challenge. He paused, scanning the crowd. I stand before you today not as a perfect man, not as a politician without flaws, but as a leader who has made hard choices and who will continue to fight for the future of this nation. Your next read is at Novelbin. Calm, he straightened. If you will have me, I will serve you again. The room erupted once more. Some reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Others shot sharp glances, already preparing the political attacks that would follow. Matthew let them react, let the weight of his words settle before stepping back from the podium. Collins immediately stepped forward, fielding the flood of questions as Matthew exited the room. The battle had begun. Collins entered 10 minutes later, setting a fresh stack of reports on the desk. The press is eating it up. Your supporters are rallying. The opposition? They're already sharpening their knives. Matthew nodded, unsurprised. I expected nothing less. Collins sat across from him. Your enemies isn't going to take this lightly. Your re-election means 4 more years of resistance against them. Matthew leaned back, which is why we don't just play defense, Collins, we go on the offensive. Collins raised an eyebrow. How? Matthew tapped the desk. Vaughn. Collins immediately understood. The private military? Matthew nodded. He's building it as we speak. If our opposition tries anything, if they attempt to influence this election the way they have in the past, I want them stopped before they even get the chance. Collins let out a slow breath. That's risky. Matthew met his gaze. Everything about this presidency has been risky. A beat of silence, then Collins sighed. All right, then he'll make sure the funding is routed through the proper channels, discreetly. Matthew smirked. Good. Later that evening, Matthew found Amber in the sitting room, reading near the fireplace. She looked up as he entered, setting the book down. It's done, then. He sat beside her. It's done. She studied him for a moment. And now? Now, Matthew sighed, we prepare for the election. We still have months left, and that means we are going to travel across different states, and traveling to different states would be exhausting, especially for you. You don't have to say that. I will help you win this re-election, Matt, Amber said softly. Thank you, my dear. Chapter 240. January 7th, 1897, undisclosed location. The order's private chamber. The dimly lit chamber was silent, save for the occasional flicker of candlelight that cast long shadows against the stone walls. Seated around an ornate circular table, the members of the Order of the Phoenix Society convened once more. These were the unseen rulers, the men who had shaped Amarathia from the shadows for generations. At the head of the table sat Gideon Langston, the Grand Chancellor, his fingers steepled together as he listened to the murmurs of his fellow members. The fallout from Bradford's failure still lingered, but they were not men who dwelled on defeat. They were men of action. We cannot allow Hesh to secure another term. Jonathan Hawthorne, one of the most influential senators in Amarathia, said, his voice edged with frustration. His presence alone is dangerous to everything we've built. Cornelius Voss, a shipping magnate whose financial influence spanned the continent, leaned forward. He's untouchable for now. The people see him as a hero, a leader who stopped an unnecessary war. If we attack him too directly, it will backfire. Langston exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. Then we must do what we've always done. We do not fight battles in the open. We control the battlefield from the shadows. The men nodded in agreement. Victor Kessler, a man known only by name in political circles but rarely seen, spoke next. His words were calculated, precise. We need our own candidate, someone to challenge him from within the system. Hawthorne frowned. The opposition is already running weak candidates. None of them can go against Hesh and win. Langston finally leaned forward, his steely blue eyes scanning the room. Then we will provide one. Silence fell over the chamber. The weight of those words sank into the minds of every man seated. Then Kessler smirked. I may have the perfect man. Amsterdam, January 10th, 1897. A lavish estate overlooking the Hudson River belonged to Charles Alden Royce, one of the most charismatic and politically astute men in Amarathia. A former senator and business mogul, Royce had spent years cultivating his public image, a man of the people, yet deeply entrenched in high society. He was eloquent, ruthless when necessary, and had one thing Hesh didn't: a powerful network within the industrial elite. And, most importantly, He was one of them, a black automobile pulled up to the Royce estate. As the evening mist settled over the grounds, Victor Kessler stepped out, adjusting his gloves before making his way inside. The butler escorted him through the marble halls, leading him to the drawing room, where Royce waited, seated in a high-backed leather chair. Kessler didn't waste time. You are going to run against Hesh. Royce, a man who rarely showed emotion, merely arched an eyebrow. Bold of you to assume I would be interested. Kessler smirked. You've been waiting for this opportunity for years. Don't pretend otherwise. Royce exhaled through his nose, setting down his glass of whiskey. Hesh has momentum. The people see him as their savior. Running against him will be an uphill battle. Kessler walked over to the window, gazing at the city lights. That's why you won't just run a campaign. You will run a movement. You will present yourself as the alternative to Hesh, not just a politician, but a visionary. A leader who offers something more than just fighting corruption. Royce leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the wooden armrest. And what exactly is that? Kessler turned, his eyes sharp. Power expansion. A future where Amarathia is not simply a nation, but an empire. One that dominates trade, industry, and military influence. Hesh is trying to reinforce stability, will give the people a vision of something greater. Royce sat in silence, contemplating. You will promise prosperity, Kessler continued. You will promise Amarathia's rightful place as the leading force in the world, and you will frame Hesh as the man holding the nation back. Royce grinned slightly. You want me to make him look small? Kessler nodded. Not just small, weak. Royce stood up, walking over to a map of Amarathia mounted on the wall. He prevented a war, something the people see as noble. How do you spin that? Kessler chuckled. Simple. Make it look like cowardice. He had a chance to make Amarathia stronger, and he hesitated. He let idealism prevent us from asserting dominance. Royce folded his arms. And what about my campaign funding? Kessler smirked. Everything you need will be provided. The order has deep pockets. Royce turned, the weight of his decision settling in. He had always dreamed of the presidency, but never had he thought the opportunity would be handed to him so neatly wrapped. This means war, Royce finally said. Kessler stepped closer, placing a hand on Royce's shoulder. Then let's make sure you win it. January 12, 1897, the streets of Amsterdam were packed. Thousands gathered in front of a grand stage, draped in patriotic banners. The anticipation was thick in the air, and then he stepped onto the stage, Charles Alden Royce. The crowd roared. Matthew Hesh had been the uncontested leader of Amarathia for years, but tonight, Royce presented himself as the challenger. He took his place behind the podium, waiting for the cheers to settle before speaking. My fellow Amarathians, Royce began, his voice smooth, commanding. For too long, we have allowed fear to dictate our future. For too long, we have let our enemies believe Amarathia is a nation that will not assert its rightful place in the world. The crowd murmured, listening intently. President Hesh prevented a war, so he says, but I ask you this, did he prevent a war? Or did he simply back down? The crowd reacted, some clapping, others nodding. We were told that war would have cost us dearly, Royce continued, but let me ask you this, what has inaction cost us? Have our industries thrived? Have we become stronger? Or have we allowed ourselves to stagnate while the world moves forward? Cheers erupted. Hesh believes in maintaining stability, Royce said. I believe in leading a new era of Amarathian dominance. We are meant for more than to be at peace. We are meant to be the greatest force this world has ever seen. The crowd roared, discover hidden tales at Novelbin. Calm, that is why, today, I announce my candidacy for president of Amarathia. The cheers shook the streets. From the White House, Matthew Hesh watched the speech unfold on the radio, his hands clasped together. Collins stood nearby, arms crossed. Well, we have our challenger. Matthew's jaw tightened. This isn't just a political campaign. Collins nodded. No, this is war.